So today, inshallah, we're going to talk about the very contentious topic of sajda sahu on when are you supposed to do sahu. The Ḥanbali madhāhib is easier than other madhāhib, alhamdulillah, in terms of when we do sahu, because the times where you're supposed to do it is actually preferred, meaning that it is mubah to do sahu at any time. And we'll get to the points and we'll talk about, inshallah, when an individual actually does need to do sahu. So in the madhab, there are three possibilities or three instances where an individual would do sahu. What do you guys think? Just general categories. Addition is one, omission is another, and doubt is the third. What do you guys think each of these means? I mean, they're pretty straightforward, I imagine.
Like if you omit a sunnah.
So don't confuse the madhabs.
Yeah, if you omit a sunnah to you guys.
Nothing else. Yeah, not a big deal. If you omit a sunnah on purpose, and I don't do it for you, I don't raise my hand for the takbirat. Yeah.
Omission of a rukun.
Ramshan, can you mute whoever that is?
Omission.
Okay.
And then you.
All right. So in the madhab, there is no such thing as omission of a rukun. And why is that? We'll talk about it, inshallah. But you do have the idea, right? You do have a general idea. You need to participate. Yeah, there you go. Down. You don't want to mute me. I mean, if you're really not enjoying it. Yes, just hit it. Yes. Khalas. Alhamdulillah. Can you just click on the screen again? I'm sorry. So like we had said, there are three causes, or there are three reasons that a sahu can be done: if there's an addition, if there's an omission, and if there is doubt. And like we said, you guys have a general idea of what that definitely means, and we'll get into the details of how to deal with each thing. So it is from the nature of the prayer. Basically, you have two types of addition: that which resembles the prayer. So what is an example that you guys can think of? That something that resembles the prayer. If I added what? I added a rak'ah, mashallah, good. Or if I added a sajda, if I added a qiyam, if I add, right? So any addition like this, then this would be considered an addition, and it is from the nature of the prayer. And we'll talk about what it means to be outside the nature of the prayer. And I'm sure, what do you guys think is like something that would be outside the nature of prayer? Right, like eating, drinking, talking, right? These are things that are not considered to be from the nature of the prayer itself. Walking, right? This is something that would be outside the nature of prayer. And is there a tolerance within the sunnah for each of those things? There is, inshallah, and we'll definitely talk about that too. So if an individual does it intentionally, his prayer is invalid. Why? What hadith can we use here? The hadith that I'm thinking of is misappropriately used quite often, but over here it would be appropriate. Man ahdatha fi amrina hadha ma laysa minhu fahuwa rad. And whoever innovates in this affair of ours, in this religion of ours, then it will be rejected, right? So why would it be an innovation?
It doesn't have precedence, and
there's no precedence for it. What else?
And it's distorting the nature of it.
Right, it's distorting the nature of basically, if the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam put a defined structure behind something, and I go outside of that structure, what is that?
I'm trying to compete with him.
All right, that's trying to compete with him. So all of those narrations, or all of those things that you guys heard about bid'ah, that's where it actually applies, right? It applies specific to acts of ritual worship, right? And there's a reason that I put the word ritual next to worship. Why is that?
Dua is also
right, exactly. So there's open types of worship that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam set behind for us. So is it possible for me to have a bid'ah in my dua? Right, it's not, because it's something I'm asking for personally, right? So there's it's not possible that bid'ah enters that. or like dhikr, right? Making different adhkar. Why? Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, for example, we know the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Subhana Rabbil A'la, Subhana Rabbil Azim." So, what if I said, "Subhana Rabba Dhul Jalali wal Ikram," or if I said, you know, what I mean, if I start making up adhkar in this way, there's no problem with that. Why? Because there's a level of creativity that is allowed in those things, and we had talked about this more in the Tazkiyah class than we did here. But I just thought it was a relevant point to mention. So, if I do it absent-mindedly, if I add a rak'ah, if I add a ruku', if I add a sajda, I add a qiyam. It was cold in here. Now it's warm. Like what is going on? What do you guys think?
I think the prayer is still valid.
All right, your prayer is still valid, for sure.
That's when you need your sajda.
That's when you need to do sahu, right? That's when you need to do sahu. So, right, like we said, sahu is when anything is added or anything is omitted, or if we're doubtful, again, there are categories that apply to that situation. So if you're adding an extra rak'ah, for example, if you're this is a unique situation. Basically, from the fourth rak'ah, I didn't sit down for tashahhud and I got up. At this point, what do I do?
Once you've realized, you immediately go down and
Okay.
do whatever.
Okay. So at this point, let's take it even one step further. I get up, I recite Fatiha, I go into ruku', I come back up, I go into sajda, and then I realize that I'm adding a rak'ah. What do I do at that point?
You immediately sit down and do tashahhud.
Right. I immediately return back to tashahhud. Right. I immediately return back to tashahhud. How come I cannot continue praying once I realize?
That's invalid. That's wrong.
Because at this point, what happened? I'm doing it intentionally. At this point, I know. And it is not, and we already established it is not permissible to leave the hayat as-salah, right? Like the structure of the prayer cannot be left knowingly at any point and at any time. Is there something wrong with the clicker?
Do you want to sit,
Huh?
do you want him to sit far?
No. It usually works okay. Maybe it's the battery. So, like we said, an individual returns back to the final rukun that he needs to, and then he would go back and he would make sahu. And again, this is in addition absent-mindedly. So the imam continues. He stands up, and you know for sure that he's standing up for a fifth rak'ah. What do I do as a ma'mum?
SubhanAllah, you sit.
Right? I say subhanallah. I have to warn him. I have to tell him, like, hey, listen, you're making a mistake. But do I stand up with him?
No.
No. I continue sitting. Right? I continue sitting. Until what point? Until he makes the taslim. Right? I'm going to exit the salah with him, but I'm not going to continue the prayer in the way that he's praying. So again, like we said, we complete the prayer individually. So all of these things that we talked about, we had said, for example, if an individual ends early, even in the madhab, this is considered an addition. So for example, after it's a salat al-dhuhr, I pray 2 rak'ah and I salam out. And then I remember, or somebody tells me like, hey, listen, you only prayed 2. In the madhab, this would be considered an addition. It wouldn't be considered an omission. Why?
Because when you make up the remaining 2,
Mhm.
you add at least one more tashahhud, depending where you start.
Yeah.
At least one more tashahhud. So the total
Mhm.
amount of action will be extra.
Right. So at the least, I added a taslim. Right. At the least. Right. At the least, I added a taslim, regardless of the the difference of opinion on the dua Ibrahimiyya being an addition or not. But I would have added a taslim to the prayer, which is why even that situation where it's apparently an omission, it would still be considered an addition. So we said, how are these considered additions? Because when ending the prayer, at the least, a taslim is going to be added, or even if an individual forgets to make a ruku', and I remember, what do I have to do? I added extra movements in the prayer. So outside of that ruku', if I forgot the ruku', what did I do? I added a qiyam, right? I added 2 sajdas. I added the sitting. There are a number of things that are added in the prayer. And then what do I have to do? I have to bring that rukun back. I have to bring the entire unit back. And then I would do sahu. Is there any questions at this point? Or are you guys following me? Okay. So what are actions that are forward to the prayer? So we said action intentionally or absent-mindedly. The prayer is automatically considered invalid. Right? If I'm praying and I take a cup of coffee and I drink during the prayer, what happened to my prayer? It's invalidated at that point, right? The moment that I leave that, there's something even lesser than this can break my prayer with my thoughts. How can I do that?
With the thought?
Well, just my thought, right? Just I can make intention and my prayer is broken, right? Because I can continue the form of the prayer, but if my intention isn't there, then so if that can break my prayer, what about these actual physical movements, right? What about these actual physical movements? So the madhāhib has something that is called trivial movements and more than trivial movements. So it's like, it's just called like a, haraka yasira, like a small movement. If a fly going like this, would my salah be considered invalid? No. In certain madhāhib, they have certain restrictions, right? So, and I always found it interesting how they count, right? So they're like, 3 movements will invalidate the prayer. So I'm like, would this be considered one continuous movement, or is this 1, is this 2, and then is this 3? How do you it's just so subjective. I find it, I was like, just imagine all right, let's watch his prayer. How many would you count? And it just becomes very subjective on how to determine. But what is the idea behind that? Why even mention or even put a number behind those things?
To simplify to people, make it somehow countable.
It's basically to instill this idea in people, don't move, don't move during prayer. There are even certain things that Imam Ahmad himself would allow, for example, the duha. If somebody is talking to him, and this happened, there's a narration where somebody's speaking to the Imam and he's like, why?
Well, let him.
Right, just to alert him, yeah, bro, I'm praying. I'm praying. Leave me alone. So those type of small actions, even if done purposely, for the sake of alerting others, these are something that is, allowed during the prayer. Why? Because you have narrations where the Prophet ﷺ, he bent down, he actually picked up Umama. Now there's a difference of opinion on when can you start the prayer like this, or do you have to wait until the prayer is actually started? And for some people, if they have a child, right, it's easier to start the prayer with holding the baby. But you have a lot of scholars who will say, no, you actually have to put the child down, start the prayer, and then you can go and pick the child up. Take that for what it is. The Prophet ﷺ opening the door for Aisha, right? This is during the prayer. These are 2 separate incidents, or these are 2 specific incidents that happened to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And we found that he did these small movements, meaning that, it's not like, somebody's praying and they're like, somebody's at the door, they're like, oh. You know what I mean?
Go down to the
going down the first floor, come in. And just just going back to, no, it's not how it is. If you're near the door, or if it's something that's even, basically, I think the Malikiyah, they say, if it's in your line of prayer, right? If it's in your line of prayer, then it's okay for you to go and continue, to take care of whatever the case might be. Meaning for them, if the door is behind them, they can't open it. Take for it what it is. Okay, so would that be trivial or not? That's a question we could all answer. Or no? My phone is ringing. Is my prayer still valid? Or is that 3 movements?
In my subject,
right, this is something that's trivial, and not just that. There's a maslahah that's involved there, right? You're looking out for the other people who aren't praying, because if it's constantly ringing, or it's constantly an alarm, yeah, what's going to happen? People are going to get distracted, right? You can't tell everyone no, you should have been in full khushu', right? It doesn't work like that. I am not allowed to test other people's khushu'. Does that make sense? If the khushu' is tested naturally, right? There's a thunderstorm, or this, or there's something really loud going on, and we've all been in those situations. Can I control any of that? No, that's not controllable. But if I have a phone in my pocket, right, I have full control over that. So usually what happens, what does the Imam say after somebody's phone rings during Salah? Please turn off your phones. I don't know how practical that is, because I don't think everybody's going to turn their phone off. I think there are personally just three tips on how to deal with the phone. Number 1, keep your phone on silent. I think for me, that's what I usually do. I know not everybody can do that. Secondly, get a smartwatch, right? No, seriously, get a smartwatch. That way, what do? You just, right? And that's it, you're done. Or get wear a Bluetooth headset. But in the Salah, you can turn it off, right? You can cancel the call with the headset. I mean, these are simple things. The 4th one you have to adjust it a little bit, but there are certain apps that you can actually download to put your phone on silent, depending on the salat. So I use Salati. It's called My Prayer. Do we get promotion? No, no. Okay, maybe we can reach out to them. So I use Salati. I use My Prayer, and I find it's very functional for me because it actually puts the phone on silent, even though my phone is usually on silent. So if it's more than a trivial movement, who decides this? What is trivial and what is more? Right. This is a personal decision, right? Somebody can't come and be like, no, it wasn't trivial. Your salah is invalid. How do you think that conversation is going to go? It's going to be amazing, intellectual, right?
Thank you, brother.
Thank you so much, brother. You know, I could never figure out the three thing. You know, you really helped me define it. So these are all very personal. These are all very personal. And what happens? Like, and I'm asking very honestly, what happens when I feel it's more than trivial?
Just send him out.
Right, it's not just that I'm out. Like at that point, what happens? You'll know. You're not even thinking about the prayer anymore, right? Like at that point, once you stop thinking about the prayer, just sit out and then start the prayer again. Start the prayer again. There's no point in sitting there and having an argument with myself like, no, it was you see it, or no, it was not you see it. It's you're at the moment that conversation starts happening, it's better to leave it off altogether and just start the prayer again. So speaking during the prayer. All right. So why is there a difference over this? What is the problem? During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, somebody sneezed, and what happened? Somebody said Yarhamukallah. And so then what did the other companions, like subhanAllah, during the salah, the other companions, they started like, getting antsy, and he could feel everybody's like kind of looking at him during the prayer. And he just like, he started talking like, Ishfikum, like, what's your problem? Like, why are you guys looking at me during the prayer? And the Prophet ﷺ, after the prayer, he's like, what's going on? Like, what happened? And he was like, I said this. And so the Prophet, what did he tell him? He said, you can't speak, during the prayer, except, for the prescribed things or the things that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught. And how do we know that? Because he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said very clearly, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. And I pray as you have seen me pray.
Okay,
Yeah.
That's a good question. So one clarification. So in the beginning of the Islam, it was allowed to speak in English.
It actually was. It was.
And second question. So if I sneeze, I can say Alhamdulillah.
No, you can't.
But I heard from one. Okay.
No. You actually no. There is a difference of opinion concerning this. But when we start talking about the Sunnah prayers, there is a lot more lenience regarding the Sunnah prayers. Like even can I make du'a outside of Arabic in my prayer? Right? Can I make du'a during my recitation? Because there are certain verses. Alaysa Allahu bi'ahkamil hakimin. Subhanaka fabala. The Prophet ﷺ, he himself would respond in the prayer while he's reciting during the qiyam. So for the Sunnah prayers, you have a lot more leeway. You have a lot more lenience. Even Ibn Zubair, radiallahu anh, when he was praying, and he would pray really long, he would actually drink water. So, you have things like this. But again, this is during the Sunnah prayers. Do you have a lot more lenience? And it doesn't mean like we should all just keep like a bottle of water with us. No, I don't. That's not what it means. But we have to understand that there is a certain tolerance for the Sunnah prayers, and it's much broader than it is for the obligatory prayers. Why do you guys think that is? Why did the fuqaha deal with the obligatory like this, and they deal with the Sunnah like this? But did the Prophet ﷺ say, okay, the faridah, these are the requirements, and the Sunnah, these are the requirements? Do we have anything like that? I'm sorry? Okay, the Sunnah, they tend to be longer, right? Depending on who's praying. What else?
Because it's maybe extra.
That's definitely a major part of it. Right? It's something that's extra anyway. Is it right? And they wanted to be very, very careful with the obligations, because the thing is that the Prophet ﷺ, the way he set up the structure for many of our ritual types of worship, they themselves as imams, they were scared of what? Leaving those boundaries in any way, shape, or form. So what did they do? They tried to restrict it as much as possible because they knew that there was no room to play with these obligations out of fear, right? Out of fear. Now, is it possible that all of these things that we allow in the Sunnah could be allowed during the prayer? There is a small possibility, right, that those things are allowed. But the reality is that even they would try to avoid it because it's an obligation and they don't want to mess up anybody's prayer, right? They don't want to mess up anybody's obligatory prayer. The stakes are significantly higher, right? For the supererogatory prayers or the extra prayers, the stakes aren't very high at all, right? Because they're extra anyway. It's like doing extra credit, all right, yeah, go ahead. If you do it like this, if you do it like that, it's not a big deal. Even the Prophet ﷺ, he showed some lenience. How?
Praying on the camel.
Right, so he would sit down and pray. He even ﷺ said, if you're able to stand and you sit, you get half the reward. And if you sit, if you lay down and pray, you get the reward of half the reward of the one who sat. For who? Who is that speaking to? So it's not just a voluntary prayer. Well, it is a voluntary prayer. And the reason we know that is because the Prophet ﷺ gave a choice. Meaning that if I'm healthy and if I'm, everything's okay, then I have a choice. With the obligatory prayers, no, I don't have a choice. I have to do whatever I'm able to. Again, it's the same principle applies. The Imams and the Muslimin, they've always tried to protect the obligations. They always did their best to protect the obligations. They don't want to stray from that in any way, shape, or form. And however the Prophet ﷺ did it, they want to be as authentic as possible, connecting back to the Prophet ﷺ, connecting back to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us and talked about it.
And now it's the last question.
There's no last questions.
No, there are. If I also heard from the show saying, if you say something accidentally, it's still okay, it's still valid.
That's different, right? So that's why there's the speaking. There's a little bit more tolerance. There's a little bit more room because sometimes we say things out of habit, right?
So if I say accidental,
that's okay.
You should not. I should not. Or
Yeah.
Not in accident. It's still okay.
No, there are certain things that we all develop as habits. Like for example, while I'm praying, if I see my child fall, like it's just a habit that Bismillah, right? That because he fell. Does that invalidate my prayer? No, it doesn't. It's because it's not being done intentionally. And we have cases where there was speaking during the obligatory prayers, even after the Prophet ﷺ abrogated the allowance of it.
The Shafis allow 6.
They allow 6 words? All right. So you have to be very
you have to be
very, very, very cautious. It's like the Ḥanbalis in the shahud, man.
Yeah. Stop.
No, so again, and why is that? Muhafadha al-wajib, right? The idea is again to preserve the obligatory things as much as possible, and this is why you'll find very, very precise kind of calculations and rulings with things like, for example, if I'm praying in a desert, how many people can be in the first row? 40, right? This is the حتى عندكم, I think it's 40. 40 people. حتى عند Ḥanbali, I think it's 40. Like that's the limit. I cannot have more than 40 people in the first row.
So really nice.
No, because the reality is when I'm praying in a desert, how long can the line be? Like everybody can be in the first row, right? It doesn't matter how many people that there are. So they put a limit to that. Also, part of it might be logistically, how far can the imam, when he recites, how far can they actually hear, right? So there are certain limitations. The limit to traveling distance, right? We don't have anything from the Prophet ﷺ that he was like, okay, 70 kilometers is a cutoff point, right? We don't have anything like that. We have a general idea of what he did. But why did the scholars put these specific numbers? It's actually to make it, we think it's more challenging, but it's actually to make it easy.
Sure.
Yes.
I have a follow-up. May I ask this question?
Nobody's praying, right?
Can I say? Can I say Amin for the, as you said?
Yeah. So
in
that is
the recitation.
So the thing is, saying there are certain things that are part of the salah that we say, right? And there are certain parts we'll say out loud and certain parts we'll say softly. And this is something that is actually narrated from the Prophet ﷺ, that people said it out loud and he didn't say anything, right? The narration of Rabbana wa lakal hamd, what happened? Hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarak fihi. The Prophet ﷺ after salah, what did he do? He said, who said this? Right? He said, I saw angels descend from the sky to come and write down what this individual has said. And this goes back to the idea of dua, right? We talked about the openness of dua. The Prophet ﷺ didn't teach him that.
So just to clarify, so I can say, we should say Amin after Fatiha, and we can say anywhere
Yeah.
in the other surah.
So we say Amin after the Fatiha,
Yeah.
right? And Rabbana wa lakal hamd coming up. These are two things that are narrated that the Prophet ﷺ, the companions actually said out loud.
Yes, but
Yeah.
what about saying second time? I mean, meaning Ansuna ala al-qawmi al-kafirin. As I mean again. In my,
Oh, okay. No, not because it's not considered something that is narrated from the Prophet ﷺ. Is it okay outside of the obligatory prayers? Yeah, absolutely. Right. So if there's a certain du'a that we're hearing, or a certain du'a that we're even reciting, like for example, the last part of Baqarah, right, the last two verses, you can say Amin after. It's not a problem.
Can I say it in the tashahhud when I say after Salat al-Bahimiyya, the Sunnah?
Yeah, I mean the thing is because I can add more du'a. Like this is just doing ithbat to that. But I mean, I don't see a problem.
Okay.
I don't see an issue, inshallah.
You already did 3 Amin, so it's counting.
No, I was gonna keep count. Yeah. Well, depend.
That's what I've always wondered.
It's less than 6. You're good, man. So in the madhab, an omission can only happen with something that is wajib. That's it. This is the only time an omission can happen. Right? We said every other situation is going to be an addition, but an omission can only happen if it is something that is mandatory. And what is an example of the wajibat in the madhab? No, ruku sujood, these are arkan. Fatiha is rukn. I was asking for wajib. This is unique to the madhab.
Wajibat would be a lot of stuff
Is it like sunnah abad for us?
Yeah.
No, wajib عندنا, for example, saying Subhana Rabbil A'la, Subhana Rabbil Azim, Rabbi ighfir li. This is a Ḥanbali madhab, yeah. These are all wajib. Tashahhud, al-akhir, wajib. No, is the first tashahhud? No, it's not. Yeah. Arkan standing, ruku', sujood, Fatiha, takbirat al-ihram, all the other takbirat.
You could go into sajda and not say anything and use salah.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
No, that's for their madhab.
No, this is most of the madhab. All the madhab. Actually, the Ḥanbalis are more strict than the other madhab. Like we would say you have to make sahu. But for no, hatta عندكم, I think the sunan you have to make sahu for, right?
Abad.
It's okay. It's
Okay.
Only, which is
Yeah.
two.
Okay.
The second rakat.
Yeah.
And qunut in Fajr.
Oh, if you forget these two things, this is the only time you do sahu.
Sahu.
Yeah.
In Sunan. Abad.
Oh, okay.
But if you add, if you replace, we have
There's
only 6
some-
situations.
Okay. Well, there's a lot here. So yeah,
What's a wajib?
a wajib is basically it mandates a sahu, that you have to do sahu for it, and if you left it off intentionally, you would your prayer would it be invalid? At the least, you'd have sin. I don't remember if it's invalid. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Last time you said
I said it was invalid. It's not invalid, right? Okay, yeah, that makes more sense to me.
Sheikh Hatem even said if you even forget to do the sajda sahur,
It's still valid.
it's still fine.
Yeah. So for the wajib, but if you leave it off intentionally, how do you share? That's what I'm worried about. If you forgot it, that's different. But if you leave off a wajib intentionally, I think your salah is valid. Like I said, let me go book back. Yeah. So you get a sin for it. You know what I mean? At the least, you're going to get a sin for it because you intentionally left off something. Now, does it affect the validity of the prayer? I don't remember. All right.
Especially if you missed the first session, according to the Jumhur, that's
Yes.
invalid.
That's the only one though. From the wajibat, this is the only one.
The first session,
So basically, for any mandatory action, if you forget to say Subhana Rabbil Azim, Subhana Rabbil A'la, you forget the tashahhud, you forget the takbira, right? Any of these are mandatory actions in the madhab. You have to do sahu for them. Yeah.
Or you dislike it when you go back to.
So, for example, if it's time for tashahhud and I go to stand up,
Yeah.
right, and I remembered that I didn't do tashahhud, at what point can I go back?
When you close the ground.
Right. So basically, it's like my proximity to the ground. This determines that. The closer I am to the ground, the more validity I have to return. Like, but even in the madhab, if I'm fully standing, I still have a choice to go down, but it's disliked. It's makruh. What if I start reciting? At that point, it's haram. At that point, it's haram. I cannot go back down. I just continue the prayer, and at the end of the prayer, I would do so.
Okay,
all right.
For us, before starting, you go back to salat then.
Yeah, your salat is invalid. That's the count. That's 6 and 1. Yeah.
It would only be if you would have gone back down.
Yes, because and the reason for that is we'll get to it, inshallah. Why that happens, or why there's going to be a difference of opinion in the madhab. So in general, what is the hukum on sajdat sahu itself? It is a sunnah. It is a sunnah, meaning that if an individual leaves it off, what's going to happen?
It's okay.
It's okay. His prayer is still valid. His prayer is still valid. And when do you do it?
But yesterday you said when that wajib action,
Yeah.
the sahu is not performed, the prayer is invalid.
For a mandatory action, for a wajib. So here, let me differentiate.
Okay.
So basically, the hukum on the sahu itself is sunnah, right? But can something obligate a sunnah?
Oh.
Like for example, another hukmu, it's makruh. I mean, it's one of the few situations. But to do another, to make a promise, to make a vow, it's considered disliked. It's considered makruh. But fulfilling it is obligatory. It's an obligation. So the hukam on the sahu itself is sunnah. But are there cases where an individual has to do it?
Okay.
But even in those cases, if I forget to do sahu,
It's okay.
my salah is still valid.
Okay.
For mandatory actions. If I forget a rukun and I walk away, and I remember 2-3 days later, like, oh man, I'm pretty sure I didn't do sajda in Salat al-Dhuhr yesterday. What do I do at that point?
Yeah, like that.
I have to repeat the prayer. And the reason is, and we'll talk about it. So transferring from pillar to pillar, what does that mean? Like for example, Allahu Akbar, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, and I go straight into sajda. What do I do at this point? Go back where? I have to go back to ruku. Why? Because they're both pillars, regardless of where I am. What if I'm in the second sajda? I still go back as long as I am in the same unit, as long as I'm in the same rak'ah. If I'm in the same unit, then I go back to the rukun that I forgot, or the rukun that I left out. But if I'm transferring to a lesser action, if something is wajib or sunnah, at that point, what gets priority? The rukun. The pillar is always going to get priority in that situation. Basically, this is it. Once I cannot transfer to a mandatory action, and this is the example of the tashahhud, right? The tashahhud, al-khilaf, if it's an obligation, once I am standing and I recite Fatiha, I cannot go back to that. Why? Because it is lesser than the qiyam. So if a pillar is lost in the previous rak'ah, I remembered in the second rak'ah that I didn't do ruku' in the first rak'ah, or I didn't recite Fatiha. What do I do?
The first rak'ah.
This is going to be considered the first rak'ah. The previous rak'ah would be considered invalid. And then you do sahu. Yes.
So that is an addition.
You've made an addition,
Yeah.
right? Remember, we said any omission is still considered an addition when it comes to arkan, when it comes to pillars. Yeah.
Sorry, you meant that, but you made that point a lot. It's basically because you're going to be doing the action.
Yes. Right. So the thing is, let's say it's Salat al-Dhuhr, right? Salat al-Dhuhr, and the second rak'ah, I didn't make qiyam, right? I just went straight into ruku'. I stood up and I went straight into ruku'. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't recite Fatiha, and I went straight into ruku', and I completed the rak'ah, and I come back up for the third, and I remembered, like, oh man, I didn't recite Fatiha. What do I do at that point?
Treat this one as your second.
I would treat this one as the second one, meaning that all of those actions,
Or deemed extra.
they're deemed extra. They're deemed extra. So in general, in the madhab, and most of the madhāhib, except the Hanafi madhab in particular situations, is based on certainty. What does that mean?
It's
if you're having doubt if that is your fourth final rak'ah or
Yes.
the third,
Yes.
the certain is you are sure you've done three,
Three.
but you are unsure if you've done the fourth.
Fourth, exactly.
You go back to what is certain, i.e.
Mhm.
the third rak'ah.
Yep.
You treat it as your third, and
So-
even if you are in the fourth,
Fourth.
in the reality,
Yes.
you do the fifth and do sajda.
Yep. So that's the situation where you're in doubt. Doubt meaning that you're always going to go back on whatever is certain. If I'm, like he said, if I'm doubtful if I'm the second or third, I'm going to go back to the second, right? If I'm doubtful if I'm in the third or fourth, I go back to the third, right? But why? Because I'm unsure of the fourth, but I am certain of the third. On what situation would I act on the doubt? Okay, no, even in prayer. Let's talk about prayer, and then we'll talk about other situations, inshallah. But I'm saying, at what point, in what situation would I act on my doubt? I'm not sure if it's a third or fourth. No, I treat it like the fourth.
It's when someone has a lot of problems with waswas, with whispers, and is upset.
Yeah. So basically, it's a person who has kathrat al-waswasa, right? Like if he's constantly hearing these whispers, and if he's hearing those whispers during prayer, do you think they're limited to prayer? No, right? They're usually outside the prayer too. And if a person is in that state, he should act on his doubt. He should act on his doubt. He shouldn't act on his lack of, or he shouldn't act on certainty in that situation. In that situation, it's flip. Why? Because it is a unique situation. In general, I think we had spoken about this before. Waswasa, when does waswasa usually happen? It happens in ibadat, mostly in before salah, in tahara, right? You have a lot of waswasa in tahara. A lot of people have waswasa in tahara. But I'm saying, at time-wise, when would the waswasa come? Before, during, or after? Before. Like, I'm not sure if I'm going to make wudu. During, like while I'm washing my hands? It's usually after. Did I wash my feet? Did I wash my hands? And if that's the case, if a person is suffering in that way, that they're constantly having it, if it's continuously happening after the action is completed, it can be after a ruku' also, right? Or it can be after washing hands, even during the action itself. But once that action is completed, a person has doubt on it, he should act on his doubt. He should act on this doubt and continue and go forward. Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive him of whatever the situation might be, and may Allah cure anyone who is suffering from that. Ameen. So when do we make sahu? Is it before or after taslim? After. Depends.
In the Ḥanbali madhāhib, it's preferred to do before, except for 3 cases.
Yeah.
It's preferred to do after.
Yeah.
Really? Ḥanbali, you guys on that?
So, I mean, this is correct, but in general, it can be performed anytime in the madhab. It can be. There is a preferred time, but in general, when to do sahu it's permissible. Meaning I can choose, right? I can choose whether to do it before, or I can choose whether to do it after. I usually advise people the best time to do it is when you remember. So if you remember before, do it before. If you remember after the salah is over, do it after the salah. It's not a big deal, inshallah. Yeah.
Is there any case where one salah?
Yeah. So the salam, the first salam is a rukun. The second one is a sunnah. You don't need to do the second one.
No, Hanafis do Assalamu alaikum. Go do.
No. For them, it's a sahu only happens after salah.
Because you could do 2 salams after, right? Yeah.
They do it consistently for the ahnaf. It's after shisma, after salah. And what is it? Because they always salam out.
First one is you're out.
Yeah, because you finish the prayer, right? By doing one taslim, you've completed your prayer. And they do 2 more. They do 2 more, and that is the sahu. What do you say in the sahu? What is the dua sahu? There's no special dua. There's no special dua. It's just you treat it as a regular sajda. Yeah. So in general, it's made before the taslim, and there are specific situations. What do you remember what they are?
So in the translation of Bashar Khattam, he
yeah.
says, if the imam is leading a prayer, he is based on not on certainty, but on probability.
Okay.
And he waits until after the taslim, so that people would let him know.
Okay.
If everything is correct or not. So he just waits until if someone would shout subhanallah. If not nobody, he just skips, meaning everything was right. So he waits until the taslim.
Oh,
until after the taslim.
So he does taslim and then he waits.
Yeah, if yeah, so
I think that makes
after
sense.
the taslim,
Yeah.
so that was preferred.
Yes.
Second is if he prayed 2 rakah dhuhr, remember, came back and made up the remaining second. In this case, when it's preferred
because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he prayed dhuhr only 2 rakah. Okay.
And the third case, I don't remember.
It's all right. I'll go back, inshallah. I'll go back and take a look, inshallah.
If you remember right after this.
If you remember after saying khalas, you do sahu. It's because sahu, when can it be done? When did we say?
Before.
It can be done before or after. It doesn't make a difference. Like I said, in the madhāhib, the only discussion is around preference.
Yeah.
That's it.
But is the preference before?
The preference in general it's preferred before. But there are situations like like you mentioned with the imam, if you're in congregation, if you shortened the prayer, by only making 2 rak'ah, then you would do it after also, and then the third one he's still thinking.
I won't bring the book and
yeah,
it will be.
No, I'm sure it's there. Inshallah, I'll go back and I'll try to add it in too. So yes.
Sorry.
Oh, and I think with the I think it's the ma'mum, when he prays behind the imam and he's sure the imam made a mistake, but the imam's like, no.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
He waits until the end.
Yeah.
So if you do sahu before you do taslim, then are you required to do 2 salams, or you can do one because one is open and the other one is?
Either's fine. I mean, it doesn't matter in any situation. You can do one salam at any time, and your prayer is valid.
Really?
Yes.
Even at the end of prayer without sahu?
Yeah, it's not a problem. Yeah. So it's the Shafi'is and the Hanafis who do equal salam, right? Equal. Yeah, they say it the same. They say it the same volume. Like Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. The Malikis, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Right?
I'm not sure they only have Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, yeah. And really loudly. And if you want to do it one more, you do it softly. The Hanabila, there's a difference in the tone. The right one is louder than the left one.
I think it's just Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Yeah.
No barakat.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
That's it.
That's
okay. Oh, that's what I'm saying. It's like the tone is equal.
The tone is equal.
Yeah.
The measurement is equal.
Oh, sorry, probably just confused you. So it's how many sajdas is this? 3, 4, 5. 2. It's only 2. So and this is the last situation, right? So the last situation is if you're sure the imam made a mistake. You're sure the imam made a mistake, and the imam's like, nah, I prayed right. So at that point, you do sahu after the taslim. That would be the third situation.
So that you are patient and respectful of the imam. Maybe the imam will do it after the taslim. So that's why you wait.
Yeah.
Until real end.
Is it ready to fight? The next section is the nawafil, the supererogatory prayers, and inshallah we'll talk about that next week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the.
Wallahu a'lam, sallallahu ala khayri khalqi nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam.
After if you want to do sajda as-sahu after the taslim, you do 2 sajda and you come back and you do tashahhud again.
No, you just do taslim. There's no extra tashahhud.
So for the doubt, if I doubted, I have to do again.
Yes. Okay. Whatever the doubt is, you complete whatever you were doubting. Okay. Like, so you basically you act on the certainty, you complete the doubts, and then you add a sahu.
Okay.
If I accidentally shortened the prayer, instead of 3, I made taslim after first tashahhud, like Maghrib.
Yeah.
When I get up to make up the last rak'ah, do I do takbiratul ihram again?
Yes, because you have to enter the prayer again.
Okay. That's
so I switched.
Your intention?
No.
Invalid.
I switched. The fard, because I was supposed to say wajib. The fard.
Yeah.
with something else. Masalan, Allahu Akbar.
Yeah.
At-tahiyyatu al-barakatuh.
Yeah. So you.
And I'm like, oh, Bismillah.
Yeah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Uh-huh.
So I took a rukun.
But so the thing is, because it's min hayat salah,
Okay.
right? It's actually something that's part of the salah, and you did it inadvertently. It's not a problem.
So
You don't need to do so.
sahu.
You don't need to do
So
so.
for the Shafi, that misfit sahu.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
So what if you mix up the order in prayer?
Okay.
Like you do sajda first and then you do ruku'.
Yeah, similar case. Because
So salah is invalid. عندنا.
I did sahu.
No, I mixed up the order.
Yeah.
I stood up, I went to sajda,
Yeah. And then
I went into ruku'.
yeah. So for us, that's ruku.
Yeah.
The sajda didn't come.
Yeah, but that's only if you remember. If you do it intentionally.
Oh yeah. Intentionally.
If you do it by mistake, labas. And if you do it intentionally, then you're salah is invalid. Tafadhali.
Yeah, so earlier I believe you mentioned that if the imam of the prayer, he knows that he didn't make a mistake, but you know that he made a mistake.
Yeah.
I think I heard you say that you can complete the prayer individually.
Yeah.
But then I heard a little while after.
So the first case is the imam added a unit inside the prayer. The second case is that the imam didn't do tashahhud, for example, or he only prayed 2 rak'ah, for example. Right? It's just the two of you. He prayed 2, and you're like, dude, you only prayed 2, and he's like, no, I didn't. So what would you do in that case? You complete it yourself. You pray 2 more. You do sahu, and then you would sit down. Do you understand that? You understand the 2 different situations?
So if
He stood up in the first one. He stood up for the 5th, and you're like, no, this is the 4th. So what do? You stay sitting, right? You stay sitting. You don't, or well, I guess you sit down because he got up, and you finish with him when he comes back. Whenever he comes back, you finish with him, right?
and you do sahu.
Yeah, because like the prayer went longer than it should have. Well, actually, the imam should do sahu.
You don't have to do sahu yourself.
He's leading the prayer, so you have to do sahu with him.
But he don't know. That's why he got up.
Oh, khalas, you do. No, but you say you say subhanallah, right?
Oh yeah, okay.
Right, you say subhanallah, and if he still stays standing, what do? You say subhanallah again? No, like, no. You keep insisting.
No.
So some people are insistent, very. No, and like very insistent. There are 2 cases where like when people are sure and how insistent they are with the subhanallah, it doesn't need to be said like 3-4 times, right? You just say it once. The idea is to bring tanbih. The idea is to make the imam aware. That's it. The idea isn't to convince him. There's a big difference. You're like, no, seriously, you made a mistake. No, it's not how you just make him aware. Like, okay, did I make a mistake or not? And sometimes the imam isn't even aware of the mistake that he made, right? The second situation I've seen is correcting the imam. So when the imam is reciting, what'll happen is you have like 15 people, and all you hear is like, right? Like there's no clarity at all whatsoever. The people who should correct him are the ones who are nearest to him, right? If I'm in the back row, it doesn't make sense for me to yell, because at that point, all I'm doing is showing off how much Quran I know, right? I'm not benefiting anyone else. If I really want to help the imam, he needs to hear a clear correction of what the mistake is. He's not hearing a clear correction when you have like 20 people yelling at him. So, if you're near the imam, you have the first right to correct him. And you correct him how? In the same way. You have to say subhanallah. You have to bring his attention first. You don't just start reciting, right? You start reciting, he'll be like, he's not going to, number one, he's not going to stop, right? He's just going to continue. And all of us have this habit. When we start reciting Quran, what happens? It just flows, right? It just comes. So how do I know to stop? How do I know to stop? Or sometimes people are just walking in. I have to be able to differentiate between my mistake being corrected and someone just trying to recite over me. So, these are the different situations, different scenarios, and Allah knows best.
And I think sometimes you just let the imam go first. Quran is amazing that sometimes the piece will not come together.
Yeah.
And he himself
will correct it.
Come and correct himself.
And that's part of the adab al-ma'mum, right? So the person who's praying behind the imam, give him a chance. Like, at least give him an opportunity to go back. And many times he'll go back himself and he'll correct and he'll figure out the mistake that he made. The moment that he makes a mistake or he gives we feel it's a longer pause than necessary, what happens? Like people start jumping in, like, oh, he forgot. I got to say, yeah, Juan, just wait. And give the imam time. Inshallah, he'll figure it out. If he doesn't know, that's fine. And even with some of the imams, there's another problem, is that sometimes they'll recite something to a congregation that is not hafiz. So he might know more than everyone else. So what is he going to do? He's going to start reciting from like the middle, or he'll start reciting, toward the beginning of the Quran, and like nobody behind him, like then he makes a mistake. So then what happens? Nobody knows how to correct him because none of the people behind him are hafiz. This is part of being the imam. This is part of the wisdom of being the imam.
So you shouldn't recite
What the people don't know. No, I completely disagree with that. Even in the madhāhib, where does the recitation start in the salah? From qaf, right? From qaf onward. This is, you're talking about like the last portion of the Quran. Like in the madhāhib, when you recite for the obligatory prayers, you are supposed to recite from qaf onward, because there are a few shurut, there are a few conditions in the madhab. In the Ḥanbali madhab, one of them is that a surah is recited in its entirety. It's disliked. It's disliked not to recite a surah in its entirety. Allahu alam. I shouldn't. No. Okay. Yeah. This, and not just that, it's also preferred in which prayers and how long they should be.
Is the surah to be completed like in one
rak'ah. In one rak'ah.
It's preferred. It's not.
It's preferred, and you have a system in place. And again, a lot of this has to do with what the training of the imam and how to deal with the congregation. Because a lot of times we forget that salat al-jama'ah is actually a khidmah. It's actually a service. It's a community service. And even when the man who came, the farmer who came and prayed with Mu'adh, you guys know what happened with him? So if he heard Mu'adh was leading the prayer, he would come to the masjid. He would pray Fatiha only, like he didn't recite anything else with it, 4 rak'ah, do tasneem, and he would leave. And then people were like, hey, Mu'adh, this guy, he just comes and he prays and he leaves. So he's like, bring him. And he was like, you munafiq, you come to the prayer and you don't pray with us, and etc. And then he said, I'm going to take you to the Messenger of Allah. So they went to the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu, and he told them what was going on. The Prophet sallallahu, he turned to Mu'adh and he said, Afattan anta ya Mu'adh? He said, are you putting people in fitna, ya Mu'adh? And this is supposed to be something that is encouraging for the people to come to, right? The people should feel happy. Even for us as the ma'mum, if the imam goes too long, what happens? Wait, you start becoming distracted. You start becoming distracted, like, it even makes less sense for me, the silent prayers. Like, there's no reason silent prayer should be long. Absolutely not. Okay, keep the ma'mum, keep the person who's praying behind you busy. So that all he's focused on is the different, the recitation and the adhkar that are in the salah. Keep him busy until the end. And if he's busy the whole time, you know what happens? He's not going to get distracted. And even during the prayers that are recited out loud, someone will be like, okay, he can focus on the qira'ah. How much qira'ah can I focus on? Right? Even we as humans, we have a limit to all of these things. Like, we have a limit to all of these things. There's only so much that we can handle, and how much our attention span is only so much. So when we have to keep that in mind when we're leading the people, keep it very short. You're not losing anything. But there's nothing wrong with that. This is actually, it's better for the people because it encourages them to come. So how many complaints do we have when the prayer goes too long? Like, this is where you get most of the complaints. Like, oh my God, he was going so long. Like, he's reciting so long. What was he reciting? And the person who puts himself in that position, what is happening to the person who's praying? He's lost his khushu'. And you've placed in his heart a hatred of praying behind you. What did I benefit from that at that point? When we provide a khidmah, when we provide a service, we have to make sure that we provide it completely. Can you close the door, please? So there's we have to understand that when we provide a service, we have to be fair, and we have to keep people, keep them in mind. And if I want to pray long, you know what I can do? I can go pray at home. I can pray at home. I can pray qiyam. I can do my sunan as long as I want to make them. Those are the opportunities. And you know what? It's even a less opportunity for riyah to enter my heart. It's a less opportunity for me to be showing off in my worship. Because if I'm reciting a long time in Isha or Fajr, what am I trying to do? What am I trying to accomplish? To show people how much Quran I know? Or how not nice my voice is? Keep the recitation short. And remember, whenever we present or whenever we do a service, we should do it completely. And we should do it with itqan. We should do it with ihsan. So ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq. Yeah, forgive me for the rant.
No.
Yeah.
I have two questions
Sure.
so far. If the imam gets up for the fifth rakah, and I'm not sure if that's this or I'm confused, and I must follow him anyway,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of mistakes done by me, ma'mun, behind the imam, the general, I know it's overlooked. It's upon the imam, meaning it's my mistakes. I'm not.
So for example, in the madhāhib, if I don't say Subhana Rabbil A'la as the ma'mum, what do I do?
Nothing.
No, I have to do sahu. Yeah.
Behind the imam.
Now, after the imam does taslim, I have to do sahu personally.
But my taslim is going to be.
My taslim is going to be with the imam.
Okay.
Right. I do taslim with the imam. Why? Because I have to follow him.
Yeah.
And then I would do sahu. Now, in the case where the second case or the first case you were talking about, like if you're unsure where the imam is, the asl is to follow the imam. The asl is to trust the imam. Right. If you like, you can give it a moment. You can give it a moment, stay sitting for a moment and wait for somebody else in the Jamaat to say something, right? Because you have an opportunity. Now you're not forgetting alone, right? Is it possible that the entire Jamaat forgets? I mean, it's a small, it's a very small possibility that everybody's just like laughing that day. But in general, trust the Jamaat. If everybody stands up, just stand up with them. And then, I mean, I've had personal scenarios like that where I'm praying I was like, is he stand up for the fifth rakah? Yeah. And I was like, okay, nobody's saying anything, and I just get up. I get up.
So, in case I make the sujood after the taslim, it's sahu, yani.
Yes.
So I have to again do salam.
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's even though sunnah, it's still considered part of the prayer.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a question, but unrelated.
Sure. There's actually.
If someone else has questions.
Because actually, Ramsha had a very good question last week. She had asked about makeup. Is it permissible for women to wear makeup? It depends, right? It depends on how much makeup is being worn and what the situation is. So in general, I don't have a problem with it. If it's light makeup, the sahabiyat, the female companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they used to leave the house wearing kuhl, right? They used to leave the house wearing kuhl. And this is a type of makeup. This is a type of beautification. So I personally don't see an issue. I don't see a problem if a woman leaves her house. Even the Aisha radiallahu anha, there's a narration in Tafsir Sufyan where she mentions that she used to wear fatah, like she used to wear toe rings and leave the house. So wearing toe rings, having this beautification, I really don't see a problem. I don't see an issue with it. Another scenario that I will bring is sometimes women, they will dress up a lot more when they go to weddings, right? So weddings is a very specific scenario where women dress up. In that situation, I still don't see an issue personally. Why?
She wants to get married as well.
No, she is. Let's assume she's married.
Okay.
Let's assume she's married and she's wearing a lot of makeup. I don't see an issue there. Why? Because all the women are dressed like that, right? Because what is the purpose behind this? The same principle, the same qaida applies to men, which has to do with shuhra. It has to do with standing out. That's what the problem is. That a man or a woman, they can't wear anything that will attract unwanted or unnecessary attention. If it's on an individual basis, there are some men and some women, regardless of what they wear, they're going to attract attention, right? Regardless of what they're wearing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them extremely beautiful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, made them extremely, like extremely curvy or whatever it's, what I mean? They just, their natural body styles like that. And regardless of what they wear, they're going to attract that attention. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm actually going out of my way. I'm actually going out of my way to attract that attention. This is something that the Prophet categorically prohibited, not just for men, but not just for women, but also for men. Libas al-shuhra, this is amongst all the madhāhib. There's no difference on this. What it actually is, it's going to vary from culture to culture, right? It's going to vary from culture to culture. So I thought it was a good question. I thought it was something that was relevant.
Sorry, what libas?
Shuhra. Shuhra is, okay, how do I... Audacious. I think that's a good translation. What is audacious? See, this is why. See, I'm reading a lot of translations.
Have you not read the translation of Ulama ad-Din?
Right. Yeah. Right. No. So audacious is shuhra.
Which one just says extravagant?
I mean extravagant. The problem with extravagance is sometimes it has to do with financial value, like monetary value. So it's not always in that sense. Like extravagant could be me wearing like Gucci shoes, even though it doesn't attract a lot of attention, but that is something that some people would be considered. They would, because there's a monetary value associated with it. I don't think extravagant is the best expression of it, but it can encompass or capture part of it.
Speaking of the makeup for women, what would you say? There is, I mean, I've asked Sheikh Google.
Yeah.
There are so many ikhtilaf saying, can a woman, a lady, have a what is that called? Nail
polish, yeah.
and make wudu?
Yeah.
Would that be acceptable?
So that's like more of a modern issue.
Yeah.
Can yeah, like, and there's like halal nail polish now and stuff.
Yeah, if that's not halal,
Akhi,
like innovation, would you say it's not a big deal?
So the thing is, it has to touch the skin. The water has to touch the skin. That's the whole issue there. And I don't know any exception for the hands, right? There's exception to wipe over the khimar. There's an exception to wipe over that. There's also exception to wipe. So if she wants to wear like, even toenails could become problematic when she goes to wash, right? But the nail polish, I need to look more into it personally. I would say very prematurely that she should avoid wearing it when she is outside of her cycle. Like during her cycle, it doesn't matter because she doesn't have to pray anyway. But outside of her cycle, the problem is like, yeah, she can put it on and take it off consistently, but it causes damage to the nails, right? And even the chemicals that are very harsh for that. So I would never advise anyone to do that. In general, just try to avoid it. Yeah.
What about the halal, so-called the penetratable?
I
don't know enough about it. I really don't.
I tried it, but
polish?
I tried it with my wife. We tried. I tested.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've seen the article saying, okay,
it doesn't penetrate. Yeah.
It doesn't penetrate. But again, that specific brand.
They said it's on molecular level, water level.
I mean, see,
it's not physical. You don't see water.
The way to test that is I would get some type of mesh or filter, and then put nail polish on it.
Yeah, that's what I.
And then pour water. And if the water penetrates it, then I could see that being reasonable. But the thing is, like, I don't know to what extent it's permeable. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so is there a certain thickness for the level that would allow permeation, and after it gets that thickness, it won't allow the permeation anymore? It's a very problematic issue. It's a very problematic issue. Again, I generally like in our house, like we don't like. Yeah.
This question on the makeup. So if you want to combine the thing is, which is the ayah, which is
وَلَا تُبْدِي زِينَتَهُنَّ. Yeah.
And if she knows that with plus makeup, she's going to be maybe more beautiful and more attractive to men.
Zay kohal, yeah.
Not the kohal. I mean,
no, I'm saying zay kohal.
Kohal. But the kohal. but
think about it.
Makeup is more than alcohol.
I mean, it can be, right? So, and it really depends on the type of makeup. And in general, and again, this is just my personal experience. I don't know how many men find makeup attractive.
It's not attractive, but it's changing the face. Like,
so
sometimes
I
was in Dubai, right?
Yeah, kohal changes the face too.
Sometimes, but the whole face, like in school.
Is that the condition?
No, but in Ramadan. So usually the sisters, they usually come.
Allahumma barak. May Allah bless them.
With makeup, right? But in Ramadan, because it's like
it's Ramadan, you have to be like khushu' tawadu.
So the boys were shocked. Who's she? We don't know her.
So yeah, in that situation, when would that become an issue?
When?
Yeah.
Like that.
Like when I go to propose, that's when it could be a problem.
She's causing fitna, right?
Okay, but again, how causing fitna is going to be subjective. And even using the term causing fitna, the problem I have now is that there are not proper studies done for causing fitna, because sadd al-dhari'a, it can actually be measured. And what do I mean by that? Is that you can actually have people take surveys of how many men, like you send the same woman, and it doesn't even have to, you know what I mean? You can just do a general survey of the amount of makeup a woman wears, and you have somebody sitting there and tallying how many men turn and look at her. And if you can actually show a study statistically, like when a woman wears X amount of makeup or covers X amount of her face, X percentage more of men turn to look at her. But nobody thinks like that. Because for me, sadd al-dhari'a, it is something that needs to be statistically established. Because the problem is, otherwise I can be like, no, this is a fitna. No, that's a fitna. No, Uthman is a fitna, right? No, I'm being very honest. So unless I have empirical evidence to actually give me data that shows me that this is something that will definitely lead to that, or there's a high percentage that lead to that. And for example, being friends with a person who smokes. Being friends with a person who smokes. Is it haram? Fidati.
Smoking?
No, that's a different issue. But let's talk about, because we want to protect the Muslims, right? In general, we want to protect the Muslims. We don't want them to fall into harm, regardless if you view it to be a sin or not. But being around people or hanging around people who smoke, is it haram? No. What if I show you statistical evidence that 98% of people who hang around smokers will start smoking themselves? Can I make a decision on that point? Yeah, right. Why? Because I have empirical evidence. Like I actually can prove to you statistically, like, no, this happens. So or a very common, like very controversial issue is masturbation, right? So one of the arguments I've heard is masturbation is haram. I don't see it to be haram, by the way. It is haram because I know, astaghfirullah, this is recording, right? So it's haram because it leads to watching pornography, right? This is an argument that I've heard. Show me empirical data that actually happens, that the number of people who masturbate will start watching pornography. And if you can show me that data, I will be like, no, I agree with you, it is haram. But until I have that data, I can't.
That should be like plus 50%.
There has to be a significant change, right? If someone be like, no, look, Sheikh, 3% more started watching porn, I'd be like, that's 3% is insignificant. This is not enough for me to change an entire ruling, to save 3% of people. And even with those, you can argue the data. You can always argue the data. So, and even that, all of these ahkam, they become very nisbi. They become very subjective. And the only reason I'm talking about this is because of the issue of fitna. Who decides? Very honestly, who decides? And people talk about, even covering the face in times of fitna, which all the madhāhib agree on, right? In times of fitna, a woman has to, like, who determines the fitna?
But I think that the shahwa itself, like with men and women, I think even if one person, if this sister caused fitna for one person, maybe I think there's, I don't know.
I think the perspective has to change.
Yeah.
She didn't cause fitna for him.
Of course,
He should lower his gifts. I'm listening. Listen, I'll tell you from personal experience. A sister doesn't have to be wearing anything special and she'll be fitna. Yes or no? Like, what does she do? Stay at home?
No, but I mean, maybe actively.
No, I'm telling you, there are certain sisters, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they're wearing. She can be wearing a trash bag and men will still be, what I mean? Men will still turn and look.
Yeah, of course. It's for both. Of course.
It's no. It is for both, but men are far more sexually driven than women. If you have one, a woman who is considered ugly by all the men in a room, if one walks in, you know what's going to happen? Everybody's going to turn and look. If you have a group of women and one man walks in, maybe some of the women will look. This is how we're created, fortunately or unfortunately. But again, how to determine fitna, inshallah, this is something we'll talk about in the future. And if that person is having fitna with this woman,